Well, welcome to this biblical site of Beit Shean. This place is absolutely incredible. It has many, many years of history. It begins way before the time of King Saul, before the Israelites. It was a Canaanite fortress. Can you see the hill way up there? See that big mound? That is the original Beit Shean. On the walls right up there, in fact, you see a tree up there behind the palm. That is a marker, just kind of an identifier of where the body of King Saul and his sons would be hanged. So it's right here that they would lose the Ark of the Covenant. Saul would lose a battle, and then the Ark would be taken, and then the bodies of King Saul and his sons are right up there. Why? Because of King Saul's disobedience. We're going to be talking more about that in our Bible time, but it's an unbelievable, incredible city here. The lower part here that you can see, the Greeks started in about 300 BC, and then the Romans came in about 63 BC, and then they just massively elaborated it and renovated it and added to it. It was the place to be. It is the most preserved Roman city in Israel. And as we walk through it, it's going to be absolutely amazing. You're going to see designs, you're going to see carvings, you're going to see artwork and things that are just off the charts. And we're going to see places like when the Apostle Paul went into, he would go before, like in the Plaza areas. They had Roman baths here. They have a theater here that's absolutely incredible. So we're going to be seeing this. We're going to be looking at the location a little bit of the historical background. We're going to explore this site, and it's a pretty big site to see. And then we're going to have our Bible teaching and then our faith lesson. So I think that you're going to find this site very, very impactful, and the message of what happened here. We're going to be highlighting the life and the story of King Saul and why God took his life. And it's a really, really powerful and a real sobering warning for us as well. So I think you're going to find this site very, very meaningful. It was a fortified city during the time of Jesus. You can see the walls around it. Over there, on that end over there, would be this is the way we're oriented. Okay, so this would be the Jordan Valley over there. The hill right here is behind you, and this was the original Beit Shean. This was the Beit Shean of Saul's time and before Saul, okay? Saul's body was hung on the walls up here of Beit Shean. This was King Saul because of his disobedience to the Lord. We're talking more about this later. Right here, we're going to be seeing an amazing theater. Right down there is the Hippodrome that we drove by. So it was huge, absolutely huge. There's bathhouses down here that we're going to be seeing. Once again, this is impressive. It was a Decapolis city, which means it was one of the 10 major cities that was developed first by the Greeks, starting in about 300 BC. Then when the Romans came in about 63 BC, they invested a lot more into it. It was, to live in Beit Shean was to live in New York City. It is Manhattan. It is just the place to be. And we walk through these places, you're gonna see these limestone, these columns, these pillars with just these, what they call flutes. It's just, the architecture and the handiwork here is just absolutely breathtaking. This is the most preserved Roman city in Israel. Just absolutely staggering as we go through it. They have these elaborate bathhouses that we'll see, so unbelievable. You'll be able to see here as you're coming down on your left, this is a common way that they would transport these massive stones. When we do the Western Wall tunnel tour, there are stones there so big that no machine today can pick them up. Unbelievable. Now, Beit Shean was one of the major biblical cities. Once again, it was a Canaanite city before. It's located on the crossroads here, so you had a travel route going this way because behind you is the Jezreel Valley. So this is the gateway to the Jezreel Valley. Gideon Spring is by Jezreel Valley. It's going to open up, but you had the Jordan River, so you had a travel route going that way, the one that Jesus would have taken, going from the Sea of Galilee down to Jerusalem. And then you had this other travel route that went along the Jezreel Valley going from east to west. So it was very, very important. It was fortified because it's on a tell. So once again, a tell begins normally with a mound of dirt anyway, because tells in these cities were commonly built on high places for defense purposes. Then over time, it would build up, and that's what we call a tell. A tell is just simply layers built upon top of another over time, but usually starting with a natural rise or hill for defense purposes. So it's about 15 or so miles south here of the Sea of Galilee. And it's also located on this Herod stream, of which is the same stream that Gideon Spring is on. In fact, Gideon Spring feeds the Herod Spring. So this place here had water, it had everything. Now, one thing that's really interesting here, and we'll see it more, but this was also just recently uncovered. It was all just buried over from the time and everything. So this is it's been here for quite a while here, but it was covered over, and you'll be able to see a lot of it was covered over. Now, obviously the tell and stuff up there wasn't covered over. Now, the city gate faced the east. We've talked about the east in ancient times. Why is the east so important? That's your orientation, right? So all your maps, all your directions, many things face the east, because that was to be oriented because the sun rose in the east. So that was your orientation. Now today we mainly use north as our orientation, but in ancient times, east was to be oriented. So anyway, it has a long history. The tell up there, the upper part was from the Canaanite period, and then the Israelites took it over, and then the Greeks had it for a period, the Egyptians had it for a period, then the Romans had it. And so the city has a lot of history. Once again, the newer part of the city down below is after the time of King Saul. It's going to start in about 300 BC. And then in 749 AD, the city now is going to be leveled. Why? Because a major earthquake comes and just levels everything. And because of the way it was built, I mean, can you imagine? It's not wood, so wood can withstand earthquakes. It just crumbled. In fact, all of the columns that you're seeing have been resurrected or re-stood up because they were just all laid down. And we'll see some that are just still fallen and laid over quite a bit. So a major earthquake came and just leveled it. And so it wasn't worth rebuilding. It was just too much. So they just walked away. But it's really, really in its heyday, wow, it was glory. It was glory. Like I say, it had bathhouses we're going to go through, had this theater, it had just everything that modern day life at that time had to offer. So on this tell up here, there have been discovered around 20 layers of civilizations. So where the tell would be naturally would be a little bit lower, but up on top there's some ruins. That would be from the time of the Canaanites, and then of course the time of the Israelites and things like that. So in Saul's day, none of this lower part existed. There might have been some stuff, but it was the tell or the mound up there that was the inhabited place. Okay, so you ready to explore this place? It's unbelievable. We're going to start over here with this theater, which is really breathtaking. So let's head this way and explore this amazing place. So you can see an archway right there to your left a little bit, right? What time period are we in with that? Okay, Roman. Okay, once again, the Greeks had started this, but it wasn't nearly as elaborate when the Romans came in. The Romans, I'm telling you, they were quite amazing in what they did. Their cities were elaborate. It was glory. The glory of Rome had arrived. the culture of Rome. Quite impressive. And of course, what you're seeing over there in the corner, that would have extended all the way over here. So this whole platform, the theater area, was all covered. Okay, and then of course, here's the seats here, and they're original. This is limestone. Limestone, as we have mentioned, was easy to work with. You would mine it. When you first got it out of the ground, it was soft, and it was, it was still rock, but you could work it. You could chisel it. It was really easier to work with. And then they would lay it in, and then after it was exposed to the sun, then it would harden up. Of course, you can see some of the basalt rock behind you. That's the natural from the area as well. So what is the difference between a theater and an amphitheater? A theater is half round. Amphitheater is a full circle. Okay, so this is a theater, but quite impressive. This is where they would have their plays, things like this. Now, some believe, we're not totally certain, but Nazareth, as the crow flies, is not a long ways from Beit Shean. And this was being built during the time of Christ, because the Romans came in 63 BC. It was a work in progress. It continued to be developed. And Jesus and his father, the word in Greek for carpenter is really a construction worker. It was more than just a woodworker, it was a construction worker. So very possible that Jesus worked here with his father, or even after his father died, worked here. But we do know that Jesus passed by here regularly, okay? And I am certain that he would minister in places like this. Okay, we'll continue our journey. Once again, as we're walking through here, you're going to get just dizzy with all of the friezes, the columns, the capitals. They're just everywhere. It was just a luxurious city. And I just marvel at all of the artwork and stuff like that. It wasn't just stones, it was elaborate artwork that they did. So it was all about glory, prestige. And to live here was to live in the best. Okay, so now we're going to be entering into the Bathhouse area. It was absolutely elaborate. It was like jacuzzis, it was like a sauna, and it was huge. It was huge. You can see all the mosaics on the floor. Here you can see what would be a pool area. Of course, in the wintertime, they would heat them. Then in the summertime, they wouldn't. A day like today, it would just be a place to come and hang out. You can see the pillars around, just absolutely breathtakingly beautiful. There was nothing in this time period that this city lacked. It had everything you would want, everything. Now, once again, the Jews wouldn't come into places like this here because there would be prostitution, things like that, and then the Jews were more conservative in dress and stuff like that, so they would avoid places like this generally. You can just kind of gather on. You can see the elaborate heating system that they would have. They would have fires outside and the water would actually come through, and they would have floors on top of this so that the water would then heat underneath. This is how you would get your heating, sauna effect, things like that. So you can just see this clay work, just elaborate this whole bath system. So once again, these little brick pillars then that you're seeing, they supported the raised floor of the hot rooms. And then hot air circulating through those then heated the marble floors that were above. Then outside the building is where you would have your fires that would, in clay chimneys, that would then pass through here real hot, and that would heat then the water from underneath. Make sense? So their technology was really pretty good. Well, you can see on your left as you're coming through, you'll see kind of a pit. That's where the fireplace would be. And then on your right over here, you're going to see pools. So what you have here on your right were the toilets areas over here, the Roman toilets, okay? We saw a little bit about those in Caesarea Maritime there. When you come to Israel and you talk in time from a lot of our countries, I know Europe is older, different places are older, but like the US and Canada, you know, something 200 or 300 years old is, whoa, man, that's incredible. Here it's like, that was yesterday. As we're coming down the Cardo, we'll stop up here in a moment because I don't think some can hear maybe. But you can just once again see when the earthquake happened, you just see what happened, like over to your right. You just see all these columns that fell down. I just want to talk with you about what you're looking at here. In Roman cities, they had what was called a Cardo. Cardo means heart. It's Latin for heart, okay? It's the heart of. So this was the Cardo, which is the main street, the heart of the city, okay? Then off of the Cardo, and the Cardo would be elaborate. I mean, you can see these colonnades. Then on each side of the Cardo, then you would generally have shops. And then you have some plazas that will go out. We'll see a plaza that goes out up here. So it was the downtown, okay? It was the happening place. That's where you would come to, like if there wasn't something at the theater, come and hang out, talk, you know, drink some coffee, whatever, shop. But it was the center of the city, the Cardo. So just picture on each side of the Cardo here, picture shops. Now, what do you notice unique about the street? It's arched, right? It's straight, but it's arched, okay? Why is that? Drainage, okay? So the water can drain. Also, what kind of stones is the road made out of? Basalt, okay? Why? It's hard. Limestone isn't as hard, okay? So it's going to be made out of hard material. So you're walking on the original stones here of the Cardo. Okay, well now let's step over here to our right a bit. I want you to look over this whole center part of the city here. Now this overlook and what we're looking at here was known as the city center. It had many porticos and huge columns around it as well. And during the Byzantine period, it was remodeled, and then later, during Muslim rule, it was a major center of pottery production. This area also served as the commercial center where business transactions and so forth took place. It had shopping areas too. As we can see, this city was amazing and had everything anyone could want. So then you have over here on your left that we're coming up, what do you see over here? You see a rounded plaza, okay? So this would be a hangout place over here, plaza. There were many Roman cities throughout the Roman Empire, right? And they all shared similarities as far as Cardo, shops along the Cardo, marketplace, different things like that. So when the Apostle Paul would go into these Roman cities to preach the gospel, oftentimes then he would be dragged into places like the marketplace and stuff like that to be questioned. Anyway, so this was a temple here. And so once again, these Roman cities had many, many false gods. They worshiped just a ton of false gods. And so this would be a place of worship here at this temple. Now, in the same way the Jews had peer pressure on their own to be right with the Lord, in the Roman kingdom, you had peer pressure to worship these false gods because they believed if you didn't please the gods, what's going to happen? We're going to have problems. We want rain, we want fertility, we want prosperity, and so if you don't worship these gods, then you're causing us problems. That was their mentality. And so that's why Paul would, when he went in, he would suffer problems. And these Christians that, dispersed, some came back, but many didn't, because that's why at Pentecost we have 15 different Jewish groups from all over the world that are represented. But they would still come back to their land, but these Christians that were out in the Roman Empire, it was very, very hard for them to survive because they didn't get the first call as far as, job offers and things like that. So they were the last ones, so to speak. So it was very hard for them. And then, of course, just the persecution that would come and then them giving their lives because they refused to worship these false gods. And so many of them would give their lives for that. Okay, we'll continue on here. As a former woodworker, things like this just absolutely intrigue me to no end, because not only do you have these these are called flutes, okay? So this pillar here is shaped like this, so it kind of starts a little bit narrower, gets fatter in the middle, and then goes down closer. But as you look down here, these are just perfectly straight. You know what the Roman ogee is, right? Roman ogee. In design, it's very common to this day, so you can see it on this pillar right behind Jared and April. I'll get up here and point it out to you. I know you guys have seen this. Let's see this right in here. You see this? This is the Roman ogee, okay? It's a real, very attractive design. In fact, in my woodworking shop back home, I have Roman ogee bits. That's what they're called, Roman ogee, from this very time period. Then we also have this street called the Valley Street. Now this street ran from the Jordan Valley, and it would be the main access coming from the east up to the city here of Beit Shean. It was elaborate, it had columns, and then you would be met with this large, elaborate gate system. So quite amazing. Again, this city was just really, really well designed and well built and really luxurious in its nature. Now the main entryway to the city was there. We're going to walk down and see it. Okay, so the main entry is from there. It's colonnaded as well. Then you would come up here, then you would have this fountain. Very, very pretty fountain.
I bet it was beautiful.
It was beautiful. Yeah, this city was breathtaking. I mean, to come in from the road off the travel route, to come into this city was like going from the desert into paradise. It was just absolutely stunningly beautiful. Now we do know the city was big and it was fortified, okay? But also don't forget that, not always did everyone live within the city walls. Okay, a lot of times they would live outside of the city walls, and then if there was a need to come into the city, they would, for just take a bath or just to come hang out or for defense purposes, then they would come in. But a lot of people did live outside the cities. They lived in their homes and stuff outside the cities. So when you hear a term in the Bible, you hear quite a bit, oh, daughters of Jerusalem and stuff like that. What's that talking about? It's talking about the communities outside of the city walls of Jerusalem. Now as we're walking along here, you can see this street called the Silvanus Street. It ran north and south, and it has these large pillars on the west side or on our right side here. It was the second largest street after the Cardo, and you can see it has these massive pillars on our right side here, just absolutely breathtaking. So once again, this city was just really amazing and elaborate and glorious in its time. Now we have this area called the Eastern Bathhouse area. As we can see, bathhouses were a big part of life in the Roman Empire and its larger cities, Beit Shean being no exception. In addition to its upper bathhouse, which consisted of mainly hot water and a sauna, this lower bathhouse had pools of cold water for a different use. Now we're going to see something here quite interesting. We're going to look at these public bathrooms or restrooms or lavatory. Now these bathrooms are quite interesting. As you can see, there was no privacy whatsoever. You would sit right beside your neighbor while here, and both men and women use the same bathrooms. Now just below the theater here was this cultic temple area. In addition to the lower temple, Beit Shean also had an upper temple area. It had altars and a raised podium and a stairway leading up to it. Everyone was expected to worship here, and as we said earlier, those who didn't would be persecuted. So when you came to these large Roman cities, you were expected to worship and bow down before these false gods, and if you didn't, it could even cost you your life. Okay, well now we're coming to the Bible time of this site here at Beit Shean, and we're going to talk a little bit about the things that happened in the Bible, but the story that we're going to focus on mainly is the life of King Saul, because King Saul presumed, took advantage, abused the grace of God, thought that he could just disobey, and God was just always going to forgive him and look over everything. Well, God had enough, and so God wound up taking his life right here. And also a tragic thing that happened was the Ark of the Covenant was taken as well. So anyway, we're going to be focusing on the life of King Saul here. So Beit Shean is mentioned quite a bit in the Bible. It's mentioned in the division and the conquering of the Promised Land. It says in Joshua 17:11, also in Issachar and in Asher, Manasseh had Beit Shean and its villages. So Beit Shean existed before the Israelites came. And these Canaanites who had Beit Shean, and of course, once again, the Beit Shean, the old Beit Shean, is up on the tell up there, up on the mound up there. So that's where the Canaanites were, and then that's what the Israelites would conquer, and then that's where the Israelites would live. It wouldn't be until about 300 BC then that the lower Beit Shean from the Greeks, and then later in about 63 BC when the Romans came, then would the new Beit Shean be built and come to all of its glory. And then the tribe of Manasseh, this was their territory. We're in the tribe of Manasseh. They were unable to conquer this area fully. It says in Judges 1:21, Manasseh did not drive out the inhabitants of Beit Shean and its villages. So once again, we talked down below, Beit Shean was a fortified city. At that time it was up here, but a lot of times there was these villages around the fortified city. So people would come to the fortified city if they needed things or if they needed protection. And then the major biblical event, once again, that I mentioned that we're going to focus on is King Saul. So as a result of King Saul's persistent abusing of God's grace, then God would take his life and, unfortunately, his sons as well. So what kind of a person was King Saul? King Saul was a very jealous king, very prideful person. He knew that David would one day have the throne. So what did King Saul try to do for much of King David's life, especially his younger life? He pursued him. He pursued him with his soldiers. What I find very interesting, and one of my favorite responses to people who are very fearful of things, is I say, you know, King David had the world power trying to kill him. The most powerful nation was trying to eliminate him. And was King Saul successful? No. So once again, if we're right with the Lord, our days are numbered, our hairs are numbered. We're not going to die 1 minute before, 1 minute afterward. So we don't have to fear these things. So anyway, King Saul tried to kill David repeatedly. And then we have some major events that come into Saul's life that are going to be key decisions he makes where God is going to become very, very unhappy with him. So in 1 Samuel 13, when Saul was in battle, he felt pressure to offer sacrifices. So he offered sacrifices that only the priests were able to do. So if you recall, the Aaronic, the Levites, they were in charge of the sacrificial offerings and that nature. Not just anybody could do those, okay? King Saul, going into a battle with the Philistines, he felt pressured, and so Samuel had told him to wait, and King Saul didn't. So he offered these sacrifices. So we'll hear this. It says, and the Philistines mustered to fight with Israel, 30,000 chariots and 6,000 horsemen, and troops like the sand of the seashore in multitude. They came up and encamped at Michmash, that is north of Jerusalem, about 10 or 15 miles, to the east of Beth-aven. When the men of Israel saw that they were in trouble, for the people were hard pressed, the people hid themselves in caves and in holes and in rocks, and in tombs and in cisterns. And some Hebrews crossed the fords of the Jordan to the land of Gad and Gilead. So they went across the Jordan, and the land of Gad and Gilead is across from the Sea of Galilee on the Jordan side up in that area, okay? But Saul was still in Gilgal, that's north of Jericho, around 10 miles or so. And all the people followed him trembling. And so now Saul's going to offer this sacrifice that he shouldn't offer. It says in 1 Samuel 13:8, he waited 7 days, this is King Saul, the time appointed by Samuel. But Samuel did not come to Gilgal, and the people were scattering from him. So we have all these Philistines, they're like the sand of the seashore, and King Saul is losing his army. Because Samuel said, you wait 7 days and I'll come. It was a test. 7 days and I'll come, and then we'll offer sacrifice. And King Saul, he's losing his army, and so he feels pressured, so he's going to choose to do what he thinks is best. So Saul said, bring the burnt offering here to me and the peace offerings. And he offered the burnt offering. As soon as he had finished offering the burnt offering, behold, Samuel came. And Saul went out to meet him and greet him. Samuel said, what have you done? And Saul said, when I saw that the people were scattering from me, and that you did not come within the days appointed, and that the Philistines had mustered at Michmash, I said, now the Philistines will come down against me at Gilgal, and I have not sought the favor of the Lord. So I forced myself and offered the burnt offering. And Samuel said to Saul, you have done foolishly. you have not kept the command of the Lord your God with which he commanded you. For then the Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever. But now your kingdom shall not continue. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart, and the Lord has commanded him to be prince over his people, because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you. So, one big lesson we see here is that Saul was the king, he was the leader, and so he disobeyed God, did not keep the command, so then God is going to take the kingdom from him. So that's one occasion, that's one of his failures. Another one we find in 1 Samuel 15:1, he failed to destroy a people group that God commanded him to destroy. He didn't destroy them all. It says in 1 Samuel 1, and Samuel said to Saul, the Lord sent me to anoint you king over his people, Israel. Now therefore listen to the words of the Lord. Thus says the Lord of hosts, I have noted what Amalek did to Israel in opposing them on the way when they came up out of Egypt. Now go and strike Amalek and devote to destruction all that they have. Do not spare them, but kill both man and woman, child and infant, ox and sheep, camel and donkey. So these people had abused the nation of Israel when they came out of Egypt, and so God is now going to destroy them. So he wanted Saul to do that. What did Saul do? He didn't obey. So now Samuel's going to confront him again in 1 Samuel 15:22. And Samuel said, has the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to listen the fat of rams. We've heard that verse before. To obey is better than sacrifice. Okay? So sometimes we have the mentality that I'll just presume upon God's grace because God is loving and forgiving. And that is a common mentality in our day today. Today, one of our greatest weaknesses in the church is presuming upon God's grace. God's okay, I can just do this, I can just disobey, I can do this because God's loving and he will forgive me. God is loving and God will forgive us, but there will be consequences. So, it says, behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to listen than the fat of rams. For rebellion, disobedience is rebelling. It's rebelling against what God wants. Get this, for rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft or divination, and presumption, presuming and abusing God's grace, is as iniquity and idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has also rejected you from being king. When we presume upon God's grace and disobey him, then it's like iniquity and idolatry. Why would it be idolatry? Because we're worshiping something else, maybe even ourselves, more than God. We're putting something else before God. So now, interestingly, Saul did not do as he was told, and he did not destroy the Amalekites, and guess who would kill him? An Amalekite would be the one who would kill him. They weren't just little slip-ups. These were major commands, and he was the king. So, whom God has given much, he requires much. So also in a heated battle with the Philistines, Saul disobeyed God and visited a witch of Endor. You guys know this story. Theologically, it's full of challenges. So Saul goes to this witch. He's commanded not to. No witches should exist in the land. They're to be eliminated. Saul goes and fakes it, and he goes to this witch because he now wants, Samuel has died, so this is later on, and now he wants to consult Samuel. And so he goes secretly, and this witch recognizes him and says, you've deceived me. So she calls up Samuel, and Samuel then has some words for King Saul. It says, why have you disturbed me by bringing me up? Saul answered, I am in great distress, for the Philistines are warring against me, and God has turned away from me and answers me no more, either by prophets or by dreams. Therefore I have summoned you to tell me what I shall do. And Samuel said, why then do you ask me, since the Lord has turned from you and become your enemy? The Lord has done to you as he spoke by me, for the Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hand and given it to your neighbor David. because you did not obey the voice of the Lord and did not carry out his fierce wrath against Amalek. Therefore, the Lord has done this thing to you. Moreover, the Lord will give Israel also with you into the hand of the Philistines, and tomorrow you and your sons will be with me. So Samuel comes up and pronounces a death sentence on King Saul. And as a result of Saul's repeated disobedience, now God is going to take his life. So in 1 Samuel 31, we see this. Now the Philistines fought against Israel, and the men of Israel fled before the Philistines and fell slain on Mount Gilboa. Right here is where it happened. That's why Saul's body and his 2 sons are going to be hung right up here on the wall, right here, because they're coming just from right behind you. Then Saul said to his armor-bearer, "Draw your sword and thrust me through with it, lest these uncircumcised come and thrust me through and mistreat me." But his armor-bearer would not, for he feared greatly. Therefore Saul took his own sword and fell upon it. And when his armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he also fell upon his sword and died with him. Thus Saul died, and his 3 sons and his armor-bearer and all his men on that same day together. And when the men of Israel, who were on the other side of the valley, and those beyond the Jordan, saw that the men of Israel had fled, and that Saul and his sons were dead, they abandoned their cities and fled. And the Philistines came and lived in them. The next day, when the Philistines came to strip the slain, they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen on Mount Gilboa. So they cut off his head and stripped off his armor, and sent messengers throughout the land of the Philistines to carry the good news to the house of their idols and to their people. They put his armor in the temple of Ashtaroth, their false god, and they fashioned his body to the wall of Beit Shean. But when the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead heard what the Philistines had done, all the valiant men arose and went all night and took the body of Saul and the bodies of his sons from the wall of Beit Shean, and they came to Jabesh and burned them there. King Saul did not get a kingly burial. His end was a very tragic, horrific end. So, what are some faith lessons that we can learn from King Saul? Now, a lot of people died in this battle, so the nation of Israel suffered a huge blow militarily. They lost many cities and they lost many people. Why? Because of the disobedience of a king. A side note is that whether it be secular governments, whether it be Israel, leadership always plays a key role in the path of a country. When you have good kings in Israel, you had blessing and goodness. When you had wicked kings, you had problems. When you had kings like Saul, you had problems. The political direction of a country and its leaders is what will determine the path of that country. Now, there were a lot of righteous people living in Israel when the Romans came and wiped out the city of Jerusalem and took the land and just slaughtered the people. But it was because of their religious leaders in Christ's day, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, who set the course of the country's political structure that caused all of this to happen. Therefore, those in power who lead nations into wickedness, may the fear of God be upon them mightily. I would not trade shoes with some of our nation's leaders this day. I would not. Because what they are doing is they're storing up for the day of judgment wrath upon them. And so these presidents, these leaders today of these countries that are leading us into immorality, leading us away from God, they will have a stricter judgment upon them because they are influencing multitudes. And I would not want to be in their shoes. You could not give me the world to be in the place of some of our world leaders today. We have many countries represented here, and you're all shaking your head because we all live mainly under ungodly leadership. And if you're watching and you're an ungodly leader, be warned. Be warned, because you will stand before God and you will give an account. So what are some faith lessons that we can learn from the life of Saul and hear from Beit Shean? Well, Saul was a self-preserving, self-glorifying, and it was all about King Saul. It was about him. It wasn't about his people, and it wasn't about God. It was about King Saul, and he paid a price. He made big decisions without consulting the Lord. What about us? We should consult the Lord. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths. So seek the Lord. Especially, we should seek the Lord in everything, but especially when we have big decisions, we should seek the Lord. And when we know, another faith lesson, when we know what to do, we should do it. We should also not presume upon God's grace. Oh, I can just disobey because God's loving and forgiving. He is loving and forgiving, but there is always consequences. There's always consequences to disobedience. And especially if we're in places of leadership, then our influence is greater. So men, I'll talk to you. You should be the spiritual leaders. You are the spiritual leaders. You will incur a stricter judgment than your wives will. Okay? Pastors, whatever, Bible study leaders, wherever you're at, you will incur a stricter judgment. That's why it says in James, let not many be teachers, for you will incur a stricter judgment. So whenever you have more influence, then more accountability or more is asked of you. So don't presume upon God's grace, and realize that what you do in leadership affects others. It affects others. So this attitude that King Saul had proved to be his downfall. Proved to be his downfall, this presuming upon God's grace. And God is loving, and I do want to stress that with all my heart. God is loving. God does forgive us. But this mentality that we can just abuse and not have any consequences is very dangerous. And I see it as a weakness in the church today. So what about us? Do we have some of Saul in us? If so, we want to eradicate it out. We want to realize once again that the path to victory, the path to blessing, the path to success is obedience. And disobedience is, in essence, rebellion. And rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft. So one of the ways that we can let Satan have footholds into our lives, I don't believe that a Christian can be possessed, but I think that they can certainly be oppressed. And one of the ways they can do that is through rebellion and disobedience, because rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, divination. Because what did Satan do? Satan is the master of rebellion. And that's his dream for all of us, is that we would rebel and that we would go our own way. But rebellion is as a sin of witchcraft, and it's idolatry, because we set ourselves up as God and our dreams as God. So some powerful lessons here, and right on that wall there at Beit Shean, then Saul would pay the ultimate price. So good thoughts for us to take into consideration. So thank you, and may God richly bless you.